Extremely common comment I always got when talking about Aptera is, how is this gonna compete with Tesla's upcoming Model 2 vehicle that's gonna be a shared platform with the Robotaxi? Of course, the Robotaxi, for the sake of this video, we're gonna put that in its own separate category because it's dependent on regulatory approval and full self-driving and all kinds of things that Aptera doesn't have to abide by. So to keep things fair, we're referring to a hypothetical cheaper Tesla that a lot of people are expecting to come out next year, which is basically just the CyberCab but with a steering wheel and pedals. But of course it would share the same overall look and a lot of the same design attributes and likely a lot of the same parts and components of what Tesla eventually wants to build at scale, which is of course an autonomous robotaxi, which in my opinion it wouldn't make much sense to compare to the Aptera because the Aptera is meant to be sold to individuals that drive it themselves. But there's still a ton of similarities here. They're both EVs with an emphasis on efficiency by having 2 doors, 2 seats. They both want to skip the paint shop in order to save on cost and manufacturing complexity. They both are likely front-wheel drive because the rear of the CyberCab is likely going to be reserved for wireless charging tech along with a lot of storage space in the back, so it's a good chance the CyberCab is front-wheel drive with no frunk. And they both have doors that open in weird ways, both framed windows as well. So a lot of similarities in that regard, but of course a lot of differences that are very easy to point out as well, which I just have to say I'm very happy to be making this video because both of these products are really exciting and interesting to me. I don't think that the efficient 2-door, 2-seater market should just be dominated by Aptera. I want all companies to have an option for people out there that realize most of their driving is just 1 or 2 people, and we don't need to drive around these 4,000-pound 4-door, 5-seaters everywhere we go because most people commuting, it's usually just by themselves or maybe one other person. That's why in a lot of places it only takes 2 passengers to go in the high occupancy vehicle lane. And the whole reason we're switching to electric vehicles in the first place is for efficiency, right? So that's why I'm excited and all pumped about EVs that go all out with efficiency and figure out how exactly efficient can we get? What are the limits of aerodynamics and rolling resistance? So I'm excited for both of these vehicles to exist. I don't think either one will kill the other. But if you're asking me personally, which one is a bit more appealing? And yeah, I'm probably biased to a certain extent, but I gotta admit it's Aptera. And there's a lot of quality of life features and individual ownership perks that are present on the Aptera that are just going to be harder with developing a Model 2 type vehicle that's a shared platform with a CyberCab. And before you go, oh Drew, you're biased because Aptera has a referral program. Well, hey, shut up. Tesla has a referral program too that I have thoroughly abused. So I can benefit from the Tesla referral program and the Aptera referral program. So that kind of evens the playing field a little bit. So if you're essentially asking me, like, if I could take one of these vehicles for free, which one would it be? I would still take the Aptera, and there's a few reasons for that. For one, I'm a huge fan of the concept of solar charging. Yes, the CyberCab design makes it a bit more convenient for the vehicle to pull over an inductive charging pad and just start charging without having to plug it in. But the only thing cooler than inductive charging is wireless charging thanks to the sun. Literally just the Aptera is constantly charging. Sure, very slowly, mind you, but the fact that it can do it all day just parked in my front yard, I don't have to find garage space for it, and I think a lot of people out there want to make the switch to electric but are annoyed because they live in an apartment or they live in a place where they can't charge their EV from home. And in a lot of those regions, you're parking your car outside or on the side of the street, and in those circumstances, the Aptera will constantly be charging itself, but also not just at home, but also as you're driving to work, it is still charging thanks to sunlight. And when you arrive at work, it doesn't matter if your work has level 2 charging complimentary or not, you just arrive at work and park in a sunny spot and you're getting sunlight throughout the day. That's, in my opinion, a lot more passive than just an inductive charge pad, which is probably not going to be included. Tesla doesn't even include the mobile connector for free anymore, whereas Aptera, by the way, is still including a 110 charger with the purchase of any Aptera vehicle. Even though the Aptera is probably going to be a little bit more expensive than the CyberCab, I think that the convenience of trickle charging throughout the day as long as there's sunlight is really, really appealing and cool. Especially think of situations where you like drive to the airport and you leave your car there for a week. The Aptera is going to be fully charged by the time you get back and still have energy left over for cabin overheat protection, whereas the CyberCab, it might have more features like Sentry mode or cabin overheat protection, but it's slowly going to be draining the battery throughout the week. So you might leave it parked at the airport with a 40% charge, but then by the time you get back to it, it's sitting at like a 30 or 25% charge. I don't like that. It means I got to go out of my way to find a charger and everything. So personally, that makes the the Aptera a lot more appealing, as does with efficiency. It was actually one disappointing metric of the CyberCab that the Tesla engineers were telling people about, which is that they're expecting to get a little more than 5.5 miles per kilowatt hour. So I guess best case scenario, a little more than 6 miles per kilowatt hour. Just for the record, since these are both unreleased vehicles, Tesla's shooting for over 6, Aptera's shooting for about 10. Now sure, there's been some design changes with the onboard motor and no more belly pan cooling, so maybe in certain circumstances the Aptera gets more like 9 miles per kilowatt hour, or maybe on a really hot day or when you're driving at really high speed it gets more like 8, but still, we're talking more than 20% better efficiency with the Aptera than we are the CyberCab, and that's thanks to the 3-wheeled auto-cycle design. So because both of these vehicles are fairly lightweight, still, the 3-wheeled design has less rolling resistance. Also much smaller tires on the Aptera, which helps with weight and rolling resistance. The CyberCab has 18-inch wheels on the front and 21-inch wheels on the back, which maybe some people have speculated they're going to change by the time they actually start producing and delivering. But again, that's assuming things. That's not basing on anything Tesla has actually claimed or done. But Aptera has committed to, yes, we are using these tires, and we know that they're pretty small, probably closer to around 16-inch tires, and that helps with the rolling resistance and efficiency, as does the coefficient of drag. So while the CyberCab is probably slimmer overall than the Aptera, because in order for the 3-wheeler to be stable and prevent rollover risk, the front wheels on the Aptera are pretty wide. In fact, it's quite a bit wider than a lot of vehicles on the road. So the CyberCab might tuck into tighter parking spaces better, but what that outward mounted wheel position allows for is a much more aerodynamic shape, and I think it's quite telling that the CyberCab is shooting for 6 miles per kilowatt hour, whereas the Aptera is shooting for 10, about how exactly aerodynamic you can make a vehicle with 4 wheels. Of course, Tesla was going for most aerodynamic, most efficient as possible, and yet still, when you have a rear axle and you have that big trunk out the back, you still have this big drop-off on the back, you know, that big flat portion on the back of most cars. That's a real drag on your aero because it creates this low pressure zone behind the vehicle, and that's why, by the way, Tesla, on pretty much all their vehicles, has such a drastic tapering off the back. That's why vehicles that are more tapered on the rear get better range, better aero. Things like the Hyundai Ioniq 6. While a lot of people think it's ugly, it does get incredibly good range. It's very efficient because it tapers off so much off the back. That's why Tesla does it with the Model X and the Model Y. A lot of people are like, why don't you make it more boxy like the Rivian? Well, you look at the Rivian and it's not as efficient. It's not as aerodynamic because having that flat drop-off is just not good for aerodynamics. And look at the difference in the drop-off on the back of the Aptera versus the CyberCab. The Aptera has virtually no big flat drop-off because everything tapers back almost into a singular point, just wide enough to fit that auto-cycle sized license plate on the back. And even that rear-mounted wheel tapers off a lot more. So the Aptera is just much more friendly to the air that it's passing through than the CyberCab. Even though, yes, for a 4-wheeled vehicle, it is probably incredibly aerodynamic. Wouldn't be surprised if the coefficient of drag on the CyberCab is like 0.18 or 0.17 or something really low like that, but the Aptera is still closer to 0.13. And again, you can remove the side view mirrors on the Aptera to improve the aero even more. The CyberCab doesn't have side view mirrors, but again, if we're assuming that they're making one for individuals to buy and own, that one would legally have to be delivered with side view mirrors. So there's still some aerodynamic testing and validation to be done, but if we're talking pure efficiency, Aptera is still in the lead here. Even if the production model of the Aptera isn't quite as good as they were hoping, there's still a lot of margin for it to be better than the CyberCab. Now when it comes down to storage space, we have numbers on the Aptera. They've said that it's 32 cubic feet in the trunk. We don't have numbers yet on the CyberCab, but I wouldn't be surprised to find out that the CyberCab actually has more storage space. At least from the videos we've seen, it feels like you can fit a lot of crap in the back of that thing. It definitely feels like the loading height is lower than the Aptera, but there's one big disadvantage I see with the CyberCab that maybe they could change if they were willing to actually deliver these things to customers with a steering wheel and pedals, and that's the fact that there's no way to access the storage in the trunk. It's just a flat wall in the back, and I really hope they change that, because one of the coolest things about the Aptera that I'm really looking forward to is the fact that that whole trunk is accessible from the 2 seats. It's like an open air design back there, so you could have your pet back there, assuming they're kind of a smaller dog, and maybe a mesh fabric just to prevent payload from kind of sliding into the cabin space. But still, there are many situations where my wife wants to grab a water bottle or a hairbrush that she left in her suitcase in the trunk, and in the Model 3 it's like, hold on, we gotta get out of the car. Sometimes it's raining and then you gotta open the trunk, or maybe we left something in the front, so she's gotta get out of the car, we gotta pop the the frunk, walk all the way to the front, lift up the hatch, and grab stuff from the frunk, whereas in the Aptera, everything we need, it doesn't require us to get out of our seat. We literally just pivot behind us and grab whatever you want, and boom, it's right there in front of you. I love the practicality of the storage space being that close to the seats, and the CyberCab, at least in these prototype designs, feels like it eliminates that by having this big wall up. I don't like that, and I feel like having that more open cabin design we see on the Aptera allows you to fit other larger objects if there's just one person in the vehicle. Like the story we had at the San Francisco event for Aptera was this woman came by with a 9.5-foot oar for her kayak, and she wanted to see if this huge oar could fit in the Aptera, and sure enough, it fit, but yes, it had to stretch all the way into the cabin space and kind of sit on the dashboard, but they could close the hatch, and that huge object could fit inside the cabin of the Aptera. I'm not sure if it could fit in the CyberCab because of that wall that they have built up. Still some room for improvement on the Tesla CyberCab. Hopefully they address that and fix that, but in some ways the CyberCab might have more vertical space than the Aptera trunk, but I think long ways, which is more common in my opinion than people loading things up vertically, the Aptera still probably has an advantage there. Another great advantage of the Aptera is it still has a charge port, so maybe again people are suggesting that, well, if they delivered the CyberCab with steering wheel and pedals, they would have to add a NACS port so that you could plug it in yourself. Well, again, that's speculating and assuming. Tesla wants to make the CyberCab as autonomous as possible, so they're claiming that the CyberCab is not going to have a charge port, and if you're having to change all of these things to be able to sell it to an individual, that's just going to add overall cost and complexity. And Tesla, in my experience, is the kind of company to hold off on adding things that could really simply solve a problem for the sake of, no, we don't need to add that because we're going to solve that ourselves, or we're going to have a robotaxi soon. So because we want this to be as common as possible with the robotaxi design, let's not make it too complicated, right? Let's not make it too different. Whereas the Aptera from the beginning has said, yes, we're going to have a NACS charge port on the rear. You're going to be able to plug it in overnight, even with a 110 outlet, the same thing you charge your phone with, and the Aptera will be able to get over 100 miles of range overnight just with that outlet. Whereas you probably won't get that much range back in the CyberCab because it's not as efficient. Even if they do add a charge port to it, it's still only going to be getting about 6 miles an hour with a 110 outlet, which means overnight maybe it gets 60 miles of range or 80 miles of range, which is still pretty good and enough for most people's daily driving needs. But if you need to drive a little bit more than expected, again, the Aptera will get more range overnight. Even if you live in a place without solar charging making a lot of sense on the vehicle, it will still get more range overnight on the same outlet that the CyberCab would, especially because inductive charging will probably have a little bit of energy loss involved. Plus, a lot of people don't have the wiring and accessory hookups for an inductive charger yet because that's not really a product that exists, whereas most people have access to a 110 outlet. If you're watching this video, you probably have charged your phone or laptop in some regard. That's the same kind of outlet needed to get the Aptera over 100 miles of range overnight. And then comes the story of road tripping. I think once again, this is a huge advantage of the Aptera because the launch edition will have DC fast charging. And yes, while it only peaks at about 60 kilowatts, that translates to around 600 miles an hour of charging speed, which is pretty much what my Model 3 gets now. The CyberCab, though, it's still kind of uncharted territory because Tesla might decide to sell it just with an inductive charger only because they want to share the platform as much as possible with the eventual robotaxi model, so maybe no charge port. But again, even if they add a charge port, this is going to be a pretty small battery pack. Like they were claiming at the event, mid 30 kilowatt hour range, and most DC fast charging battery packs can't get much more than about 3C, or a charge current that's 3 times the battery pack capacity. So 35 kilowatt hours times 3, you're looking at a peak of around 100 or 120 kilowatts. And with 120 kilowatts and looking at around 6 miles per kilowatt hour, you're looking at similar charging performance of around peaking at 600 miles an hour. But again, Tesla's battery packs are known for tapering off fairly quickly, whereas the Aptera battery pack, because it's only maxing out at around 1.2 C, it means that the Aptera battery should be able to hold that 60 kilowatt charge speed deeper into the battery pack because the Aptera has a bigger overall battery, looking at over 40 kilowatt hours, which also translates to another important factor, more range. Yes, the Aptera is still on track to hit its advertised range of 400 miles. For one, because they've got some added buffer in the battery pack, it should be about 42 kilowatt hours usable. Plus, you're still getting sunlight as you're driving on a road trip, so over the course of the day, you should be able to access, in a sunny climate, like 45 to 40 46 kilowatt hours. And with its super aerodynamic design and lightweight rolling resistance, I think the Aptera will get around 400 miles of range. Of course, it's going to have a lot of variables depending on the climate and the speed that you're traveling at, but overall, it's a bigger battery pack because Aptera is using nickel, manganese, and cobalt, whereas Tesla is most likely going to be using lithium iron phosphate with the CyberCab for that higher cycle life. And again, you might pitch that, well, Tesla's going to switch to nickel, manganese, cobalt chemistry if they end up delivering it to customers, but again, that's speculation. That's assuming things we don't know, and my guess is Tesla would rather share as many parts and components possible with the eventual robotaxi variant, which won't have a steering wheel or pedals. So while the CyberCab is going to be looking at like 200 miles of range, the Aptera is going to be like double that. So while yes, Aptera with the launch edition at least is targeting a 400-mile range, that might be a bit more expensive, so it might be closer to a $35,000 price, whereas the CyberCab, if they end up selling that with a steering wheel and pedals, is probably going to be more like $30,000. Tesla also has a tendency of asking more than we initially thought, so I think the price points on these vehicles are going to be pretty close, but the fact that the Aptera won't require you to buy your own mobile connector, won't require you to buy an inductive charger, and the Aptera will be capable of charging itself off of sunlight, whereas the CyberCab, you're going to have to be paying for every single ounce of electricity you pump into that thing. I think over time, the Aptera actually might be cheaper. It has longer range. It'll be more passively charged. It'll probably be better at road tripping because it definitely will have a NACS port in DC fast charging, whereas with the CyberCab, we really don't know. And as far as timelines is concerned, the Aptera is gearing up for production tooling right now. So the first deliveries of the Aptera are supposed to take place in 2025, whereas with the CyberCab, we're not entirely sure. They are shooting for 2026, but Tesla and their timelines have been known for being late, but maybe Tesla has some tricks up their sleeve, and maybe these vehicles are going to be launching pretty close together. But there's other small advantages as well, like the Aptera is going to support CarPlay, which I know a lot of people like. I've been very disappointed with the Tesla navigation system on my Model 3, so I'm excited to try that out. Plus, Aptera is a right-to-repair company. They're all in favor of making their vehicles more repairable. I've had very bad experiences with Tesla and their service centers, so I'm kind of looking forward to moving away from that and buying from a company that's open-minded towards anybody being able to work on their vehicles. So at the end of the day, the CyberCab is cool. I really hope they end up selling it to individuals, but at the end of the day, the Aptera is still far more appealing to me. But how do you guys feel about it? Which one makes more sense to you? Feel free to comment down below, and thank you to everybody supporting this channel directly. Seriously, helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos. So thanks again. Have an excellent rest of your day.